The grand ballroom of the Astoria was a masterpiece of shimmering gold and crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with the quiet murmur of powerful people making dangerous deals, mixed with the faint, metallic scent of unspoken threats. Ava adjusted the strap of her emerald green dress, a loaner from the catering agency that felt more like a costume than an outfit. It was designed to make the staff invisible, to melt into the opulent background of the city's criminal elite. At 25, she should have been starting her medical residency. Instead, a scandal that wasn't her fault had destroyed her future, leaving her to serve drinks to the very kind of men who saw human lives as entries on a balance sheet. In the reflection of a silver platter, her eyes looked tired and ancient, filled with a terror she fought to conceal. The entire ballroom was a tank full of sharks, and tonight, the most dangerous one of all was Jin Kwon. Jin Kwon, the powerful Korean Mafia boss, sat at the main table in the center of the room. He was a force of nature, pulling the entire event into his orbit. He was younger than the whispers suggested, maybe in his early 30s, with sharp features and hair as black as polished stone. He wore a custom-tailored black Mafia suit with a crisp white collared shirt, a look that cost more than Ava's entire college education. The suit was expertly cut to hide the sleek pistol holstered under his left arm. He didn't need to speak. His silence was a weapon. Powerful men twice his age leaned toward him, their faces slick with sweat, desperate for a nod of approval. Jin remained perfectly still, a cold statue of absolute control. The agency briefing had been terrifyingly clear about him. They called him the Silent King, a ruthless Korean mafia boss who had built his empire on brilliant strategy and terrifying force. Spilling water near him was a career-ending mistake. Interrupting him was a death sentence. Ava took a shaky breath and started forward when the catering manager gave her the signal to serve the head table. As she walked, the noise of the party seemed to fade away, replaced by the sound of blood rushing in her ears. She focused on the soft click of her heels on the marble floor, counting her steps to keep her heart from bursting out of her chest. 1, 2, 3. Pour, smile, and get away. It was a simple task, but as she drew closer, her eyes moved from the espresso cups on her tray to the man sitting at Jin Kwon's right. His name was Marco, Jin's second in command, a man with a polished smile and cold, empty eyes. Ava saw Marco's hand pause over Jin Kwon's cup for just a fraction of a second too long as she approached. It was a tiny, almost invisible movement, a bit of sleight of hand she would have missed if she hadn't spent years studying human anatomy and the subtle twitches of muscles that betray intention. In that split second, she saw a flicker of white powder dissolve into the dark espresso. Her stomach plummeted. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a witness to an assassination about to happen. Panic seized her, cold and sharp. If she did nothing, the powerful mafia boss would drink the poison coffee and die within minutes. The poison was likely a fast-acting agent that would mimic a heart attack, leaving no obvious trace. But if she said something, Marco would have her dragged away and silenced before she could finish a sentence. She was a nobody, a disposable girl in a green dress, but the same instinct that had pushed her toward medicine, the deep, driving need to save a life, won out over her own will to survive. She reached the table, her shadow falling across the pristine white linen. Jin Kwon didn't even look up. He reached for his cup. Ava's heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't use words to warn him. There were too many people, too many ears listening. She had to do something physical, something that couldn't be ignored. Just as Jin Kwon's fingers touched the porcelain handle, Ava faked a stumble. It was a wild gamble, a clumsy act that went against all her training. She lunged forward, intentionally snapping her wrist so the tray tilted violently. The poisoned espresso didn't just spill. It flew through the air in a perfect arc. The scalding dark liquid splashed across the front of the spotless white shirt of the most feared Mafia boss in the country. The sound of the shattering cup was like a gunshot, and the entire ballroom fell instantly silent. The music stopped. All conversation died. In the vacuum of sound, the only noises were the drip of coffee onto the marble floor and the collective gasp of 300 guests who were certain they had just watched a woman sign her own death warrant. The response was swift and brutal. 2 of Jin's bodyguards appeared out of nowhere, their hands grabbing Ava's arms in a crushing grip, pulling her backward. She didn't fight them. She just stared at Jin Quan, her eyes wide, waiting for the command that would end her life. Jin stood up slowly, every movement smooth and predatory. The coffee stain spread across his chest like a dark wound, steam rising from the fabric. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes were locked on hers. He didn't glance down at his ruined shirt. He only looked at the waitress who had dared to spill something on him. He raised a hand, and the guards holding her froze in place. He walked around the table, the sharp clicks of his shoes on the marble echoing in the dead quiet. He stopped just inches in front of her. She could feel the heat and power coming off of him. He reached out and wrapped his fingers around her chin, forcing her head up so she had to meet his gaze. His grip was like steel, but his hand was steady, not shaking with rage. It was the hand of a man who was calculating, not reacting. "Do you have a death wish?" he asked. His voice was a low, smooth rumble, carrying no anger, only a deadly curiosity. He expected her to cry, to make excuses, to beg for her life, but Ava didn't. She was trembling, but her dark, intelligent eyes held his stare. She couldn't speak freely, not with Marco standing just a few feet away, watching them with a suspicious glare. "It was bitter," she whispered, the words so quiet he could barely hear them. She saw his eyes narrow in confusion. It was a bizarre thing to say. A clumsy waitress would apologize. A terrified woman would plead. But she was commenting on the taste of a drink she had never tasted. Jin Quan was a mafia boss who survived by noticing when things didn't add up, and this was a glaring inconsistency. He tightened his grip on her chin, his thumb brushing against the side of her neck, feeling the frantic, hammering beat of her pulse. His eyes then dropped to her hand, the one that had slipped. A small red burn mark was already forming on her wrist where the hot coffee had splashed her. But just beneath the burn, where her green sleeve had ridden up, was a faded, jagged scar in the shape of a crescent moon. It was an old injury, one he recognized immediately. Jin Quan went completely still. The fury on his face vanished, replaced by a flicker of stunned recognition. He knew that scar. He had seen it 5 years ago in a confidential file labeled collateral damage. The file was about a medical relief camp in a conflict zone that had been accidentally destroyed by a weapons shipment from his family's company. He looked back into her eyes, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a waitress, but as the young woman from the photograph he kept locked away in his private safe. She was the one survivor he had never been able to find. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. She hadn't been attacking him. She had just saved his life, and in doing so, had exposed herself to all the dangers of his world. "Let her go," Jin Quan commanded, his voice cutting through the tense silence. The guards hesitated, confused by his sudden change in tone. "I said, let her go." He grabbed Ava's wrist himself, pulling her away from the guards and into his personal space. To everyone else in the room, It looked like he was taking her away for a private and likely final punishment. But for Ava, it felt like being pulled back from the edge of a cliff. He turned to the stunned crowd, his expression bored and dismissive. "The girl is clumsy. I will handle her discipline myself. Everyone, leave." It was an unheard-of command, to empty a gala in the middle of the evening, but such was the power of this Mafia boss that guests immediately began shuffling toward the exits without a word. Jin didn't watch them go. He started pulling Ava toward a private service elevator, his grip on her arm tight and bruising, but unmistakably protective. The short elevator ride was silent and suffocating. The mirrored walls showed them over and over again. The tall, imposing crime lord in a coffee-stained shirt, and the trembling young woman in an elegant green dress, her chest rising and falling with adrenaline. As the elevator climbed, Jin stood with his back to her, watching the floor numbers light up. Between floors, he suddenly hit the emergency stop button. The elevator lurched to a halt, throwing Ava off balance. He turned around slowly. The mask of indifference was gone, replaced by a sharp, intense focus that made her feel like he could see right through her. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice sharp in the small metal box. "And don't you dare lie to me. Lying is the only thing that will guarantee you die in here." He stepped closer, crowding her against the wall. "You didn't trip. You threw that cup at me. Tell me why." Ava swallowed, her throat painfully dry. "Bitter almond," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I smelled it when the coffee splashed. Cyanide. It smells like bitter almonds to some people, a genetic trait. I have the gene. You were about to drink a fatal dose." Jin Kwon stared at her, judging the truth in her words. He knew of the poison. It was a favorite among his enemies. But for a waitress to identify it by smell in a crowded, noisy room... "You're not a waitress," he stated. He looked down at her hands. They weren't the soft hands of a server. "Who are you?" "I was a medical student," Ava confessed, her eyes falling to the floor. Before everything changed. I saw the man next to you, Marco, drop something in your cup. If I had shouted a warning, he would have heard me and killed us both. If I did nothing, you would be dead. Spilling the coffee was the only option I had." She looked up at him, her eyes pleading for him to understand her desperate logic. "I didn't want to see you die." He studied her face, looking for any sign of a lie, and finding only raw, terrified honesty. He gently took her hand again, lifting it to look at the old crescent-shaped scar on her wrist. His thumb traced the raised white tissue, sending a shiver through her that wasn't from fear. "And this?" he asked softly. "Where did you get this scar?" "A relief camp," she whispered, pulling her hand away instinctively. "Up north, 5 years ago. There was an explosion." Jin closed his eyes for a brief moment, a muscle twitching in his jaw. The universe had a strange way of settling debts. The one person his family's business had wronged the most had just walked into his life and saved him. He opened his eyes and they were dark with a complex mix of guilt and determination. "You have no idea what you've just done," he said, his voice a rough murmur. "You saved my life, but in doing so, you publicly humiliated Marco. He knows that you saw him. As long as you are alive, you are a loose end he needs to eliminate." He started the elevator again. "You can't go back to your old life. Not tonight. Maybe not ever." The penthouse suite was a fortress of glass and steel, with commanding view of the city's sprawling lights. It was cold and impersonal, a place designed for power, not for living. Jin Kwon led Ava inside, the heavy reinforced door locking behind them with a solid thud. He went to a bar, poured her a glass of water, and slid it across the granite counter. He paced the room, taking off his ruined jacket and tossing it aside. The gun in his shoulder holster was a stark reminder of the violent world he lived in. Marco has been with me for 10 years, Jin said, looking out the window. He's ambitious, and he was getting impatient, but I never thought he was stupid enough to try something like this in public. He turned to face Ava, who was clutching the water glass as if it were a shield. He will try to finish what he started, and his first step will be to get rid of the only witness. That's you. Ava felt the walls closing in. I just want to go home, she said, her voice cracking. I won't tell anyone what I saw. I can disappear. I've done it before. You can't disappear from men like us, Jin said, his voice firm. He walked back to the counter, standing opposite her. We own the shadows you would try to hide in. If you leave this penthouse tonight, you will be dead in less than an hour. Your only chance to live is to stay right here, where I can protect you. He looked at her elegant green dress, which now seemed like a tragic costume. What's your name? Ava, she said. Ava, he repeated as if testing the name. My name is Jin Kwan. Tonight you are my guest. And you are under the protection of a very powerful Mafia boss. He pulled a military-grade first aid kit from a drawer. Give me your wrist. That burn needs to be treated. It was a strange and sudden shift. The ruthless crime lord, a man known for his brutality, was now gently opening a sterile packet of burn cream. Ava hesitated for a moment, then held out her arm. As he applied the cool gel, his touch was surprisingly light and careful. You have steady hands, he noted quietly, his eyes focused on his work. For someone who claims to be so afraid, fear is a physical reaction, Ava replied, the words coming automatically from her medical training. What you choose to do is what matters. Jin paused, his eyes lifting to meet hers. For a split second, the enormous gap between them, the crime lord and the former student, the killer and the healer, seemed to disappear. They were just two survivors, trapped in a glass tower, being hunted by the same man. Then we need to choose our next actions very carefully, he said. He finished wrapping her wrist in gauze, his fingers lingering on her skin for a moment too long. A sharp buzz from the intercom shattered the quiet moment. Jin's expression hardened instantly as he walked to a wall panel and pressed a button. A video screen flickered to life, showing Marco standing in the lobby 40 floors below, that same fake shark-like smile on his face. Boss, Marco's voice said through the speaker, just checking in about the girl. The catering agency is asking about her. We should send her down. I can take care of it. You shouldn't have to bother yourself with the hired help. Ava held her breath, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at Jin. This was the moment of truth. He could hand her over, get rid of the problem, and deal with Marco on his own terms. It would be the smart, ruthless thing for a Mafia boss to do. Jin stared at the screen, his face unreadable. He pressed the talk button. The girl is with me, Marco, he said, his voice flat and final. She stays with me. If the agency has a problem, they can send me the bill. And, Marco? Yes, boss? If anyone, and I mean anyone, comes up to this floor tonight, I will consider it an act of war. Are we clear? There was a long silence from the other end. Understood, boss, Marco finally said, his smile faltering for the first time. The screen went dark. Jin turned back to Ava. The air in the room was now charged with the certainty of violence. He knows, Jin said. The war has just started. He walked to a closet and pulled out a clean, oversized white shirt, tossing it to her. Get out of that green dress. It makes you a target. You need to look like you belong here. Ava caught the shirt, holding it to her chest.